All right, so I'm excited to have Sam back with us from Tennis Express. Sam, I've made a decision here. I want to do a little product placement here. Thank you so much, Tennis Express, for the demo program. I absolutely love being on it, and I have made a final decision. We've had a lot of great rackets, and I think I'm going to surprise you and a lot of people out there what my favorite one is. Okay, I would consider this a dark horse. Do you want to take a guess?
Would you be willing to say an upset? Is it an upset?
It's an upset. I think
Okay.
so. For a lot, yes. So, picking out the wrong one here. Here it is. Right here. Boom.
What?
The
He
Dunlop.
went with the Dunlop.
I love it. The CX400.
Nice.
Does that surprise you?
No. I mean, not because the racket's not fantastic. Like it's a really good racket.
It's a great
I don't
racket.
know. I felt like early on you were pretty high on some of the early ones you tried, but like like a lot of things, when you're demoing rackets and stuff, sometimes the what you're looking for and what you want kind of evolves a little bit, and so that's awesome. That the new red color on the CX series too is really sweet looking.
It is very good, and it goes well with it. Notice I got the red strings in there.
Yeah.
And this was second place, though. I mean, the gravity was. I could easily use the gravity too, but I feel that. Let me know what you think. I feel this just had more pop to it, and the people I was hitting with, that was kind of cool in that. Getting the feedback from the people I hit with, where they'd said, "Oh, you hit better with more spin, things like that." And like when I was using the Babel, I'm like, I didn't feel like I had great control, but they said I had more pop with the Dunlop, and I also felt like I had the control and the spin and everything.
That's awesome. I was real interested in your approach of kind of like hearing from your sparring partners. Like I think that's a really kind of important, obviously you're going to make the call on what racket you're going to use, but I do think it's cool to kind of, hear what people are feeling the ball that you're hitting, with which racket, or, they probably can answer you, better. Hey, like for instance, maybe you feel like, man, I just don't feel like I'm getting enough spin, and they could be completely disagreeing and saying, oh man, I feel like the ball's getting up on me a lot higher when you're using that frame or kind of different things. So yeah, I kind of, if you don't mind, I think I'm gonna start trying to use that too. Is
Yeah.
get some of our testers and try to get some feedback from the folks that they're playing with too, just to try to get a little bit more data.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I mean, even when I narrowed it down to these two, I was hitting with my friend Ken, and he said there's no comparison in his mind that I was able to somehow put a lot more weight on this racket than I was the gravity. I mean, they both felt great, and I felt like I was getting a little more pop on the Dunlop, but I also felt like I was hitting really good with this one too. But they said more power with the Dunlop, so
You know what's
power
sweet
wins.
about the CX400 is that Dunlop's got this material in the hoop of their rackets. It's called Sonic Core with Infinergy. And so while the racket is still probably a little bit on the firmer side, like a little more crisp feeling, they've done a really good job of kind of making it a little bit more comfortable as well. And I've spoken with you on, several of our videos just about how, things went super stiff for a while, as far as rackets. And I think now every manufacturer has sort of said, okay, like we can have a firmer flex, but we also need to protect our players, and we need to keep some comfort and some shock absorbing, injected into some of these newer frames. And that's definitely the case with the CX400. It's got a little bit of a crisp feel, but again, that kind of comfort and, more forgiving technology that's embedded in the hoop is just what the doctor ordered.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you said that there's actually technology in the racket to kind of make you feel that way, because that's exactly how I felt. I felt like, okay, this racket feels really solid, but there's feel in it, there's comfort in it. So, um, Yeah, like I felt like I could use the power when I wanted. I felt like it has good touch and felt good on the arm. Like there was nothing negative I could say about the racket, and that's why I picked it. You know, with some of the other rackets, I'm like, this is a good racket, but I feel like it's got too much power, not enough power. Or for whatever reason, I'm spraying the ball, and you know, I don't know why I'm spraying the ball. I know it's ultimately my fault. If you hit a good shot, it's going to go in, but you know, just didn't feel comfortable with some of them.
I think what can work well for you too is that I don't think you've I don't think you've outkicked your coverage as far as weight in a racket. Like I know you teach a lot and you're hitting more and more. And I feel like with this frame, whether you're teaching, feeding a bunch of balls, or if you're really, doing more of a hitting lesson, or if you're playing, I feel like this is a racket that you can be comfortable with. It's not, like, feeding with the 12-ounce racket or something after 15, 20 minutes is not ideal. And then, hopefully as a coach, with that weight, it's pretty accessible to a lot of different kinds of players and different levels of players. So, that's always nice too when you get asked as a coach and as an influencer, like, hey, what is that racket? What do you think? And as great as it is sometimes to have your favorite racket, if it's like almost 12 ounces, you're like, well, I can't really put this in your hand.
Yes. Yes.
So that doesn't help me much.
Good point. Yeah, the weight is nice, and that's it's interesting you said that too. It's like, yeah, I think I could go teach with it and don't have to work that hard to, feed the ball into people and spend a lot of hours on the court, and then when I want to go play, I feel like I can swing out against a 4-5 or 5-0 or whatever, and it feels fine.
Right. Now,
Yeah.
are you sure that none of these guys that you're hitting with are like, man, we don't want to tell Pete that he's killing it with this racket because if we want him. It's like, oh yeah, tell him to get the Dunlop because he's, because that way we're going to be able to beat up on him. But
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the older I get and the more I coach, I'm not as big a threat, so I don't think they're too worried about that. And
right, right.
it was just fun to hit with, and I definitely, I mean, like you said, I'm gonna go with my first gut feeling first, and that's what I did. Um, because there were some other rackets where people were like, man, you're hitting a lot of spin, you're doing this, but it just didn't feel right for me. But it was nice to feel really good with the Dunlop, and then the people I was hitting with said, yeah, that it's coming in pretty good. So that felt great.
So if I can ask you just a couple of questions, I know you've kind of been out of or you had been out of the new racket game for a little while.
A long time.
And I'm kind of curious. Obviously you kind of you reached out and wanted to demo some rackets and, kind of see what was out there. Like, was there anything I mean, you tested a pretty diverse set of brands too, like different models from lots of different racket manufacturers. Was there anything that kind of leapt out at you? Like, do you feel like innovation has really moved forward, or when it gets down to it, do you still feel like, hey, I mean, a good racket's a good racket. It's graphite and it's grommets and the grip and it's just about finding something good that you feel good with, or did anything kind of leap out at you as like, man, this is really kind of different when you compared it to what you had been using from the previous years?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I feel like rackets are kind of like cars and modern tennis players in that, I mean, like, you know, back a while back, you go, that's a great car, and then that's a lemon. Like, I don't think they really make lemon cars anymore. Everything's
Right,
good and solid. You could look at the Pro Tour, back 15, 20 years ago, and of course, all the players are awesome, but there would clearly be some players in the top 100 that didn't have near the technical skills of like an Andre Agassi, right?
right.
Where now all the pros, even if they're 300 in the world, are technically flawless. And I felt like hitting with all the rackets, it really just comes down to preference. You're not going to really pick a bad racket. It's not like you pick a racket and you're like, oh man, you shouldn't have picked that one. That racket stinks. Like for the perfect example of, I think, something that a lot of people fell in love with, but then once you started to play with it, I mean, I think it only could work for a small percentage of people, was that Wilson profile back in the day.
Right.
I don't know if you remember that racket, but I mean, I hit with it. I had a ton of power. And then like a week later, I'm like, I can't keep one ball in the court. And I feel like
Yeah.
only a couple people could use that racket.
It was this thick. It was as
Yeah.
thick as my forearm.
Yes. And so the power became addictive, but really, once you kind of got over the euphoria of just hitting the ball probably 20, 30 miles an hour faster you ever had in your life, you're like, I can't control this animal. Where
Right.
I think the
Well, do
rackets
you
today
even,
are really good.
not to digress, but do you even remember remember how power obsessed it got with rackets? Like I'm thinking I'm probably dating myself here, but I remember the beginning of when the rackets were like, you know what, we're going to build 28-inch rackets
Yes.
instead of the 27-inch rackets. And it was
Yes.
just like, I
The
remember
long,
Michael Chang
the
switched
long
to
body,
a
right?
28-inch racket.
To get the
And,
serve popping.
yeah, and it was all about like, okay, I've got to get more free points. I'm really fast around the court and I counterpunch really well, but I need more free points to compete with the Samprases and all these guys. And I think you could argue it kind of affected his game a little bit, trying to play a little bit bigger. And I do remember just how addictive that power was. The first few times you picked one of those up, you're almost like, like what's the old expression, like more money, more problems, but like
Yeah.
more power, more problems. You
Yes.
you
Yes.
start trying to play bigger and bigger, and before you know it, you're like, well, that's not really my game.
Hmm.
I don't know. I just think that's an interesting point you said about the profile. Is like you're totally right. Like, what is this? This is great. It feels great. I'm hitting the ball so much bigger. But then, are you necessarily better?
Yeah.
Are you necessarily a better
Then
player?
my drop
Yeah,
shots would go past the service line. Like, oh, this is not
right.
good.
Or you're trying to play a half volley and you put it into the fence, or
Hmm.
it's like, oh man, it's there's some subtlety to it. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the comparison I use too, and yours was very apt as well, is like, you know, there are so many auto manufacturers, and maybe in the 90s or the early 90s, Honda was sort of rising up, and Hyundai was kind of,
Yeah.
Hyundai, oh, I don't know you don't know what you're going to get. And now I feel like pretty much any car manufacturer you go across the board and you're like, yeah, they all kind of have a really nice warranty on them now. They're all really well made. And I do feel like there's some, racket manufacturers that are in the weeds. And, certainly if you're picking something up from Walmart or whatever, you're
Oh yeah.
probably not going to get the best engineering. But in general, you hit the big boys, Babolat, Wilson, Head, Dunlop, Yonex. I mean, you hit these brands, Vocal, and they're all going to have, a racket that you can play with. It just kind of comes down to what you're comfortable with, going to battle with. And then, I certainly think still the look and kind of the feel and the aesthetic of it has a lot to do with it as well.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I mean, any of the rackets I tried, if somebody said, "Look, you got to make this racket work," you got to play with it, I'd be like, "Yeah, this is great." I mean, they were all good rackets. Not like I thought, "Oh,
Right.
this racket sucks." Like they are all good rackets, and that's what's kind of cool about, um, you know, picking up a new frame. That's why I was excited. I mean, I could tell like my rackets were becoming just old, outdated. It was time to upgrade, and since I want to play more and hit more for myself, I wanted a racket that I could go to and trust, and that's how I ended up picking the Dunlop.
It's interesting too, Pete, because sometimes when you're, let's say you're struggling, you're playing your weekly doubles or you're, whatever it is, hitting a couple of times a week, and you just, I've heard it called dead arm. I've heard it, I've lost the feel for the ball. I'm
Mhm.
just, I'm kind of jaded about my tennis right now. And sometimes, like, I mean, I sound like a master marketer here, but sometimes switching your racket or changing some of that equation can inject a little bit of excitement. And I almost, think about on a computer when you hit Control F5 and it refreshes. I almost feel like sometimes when you feel like your tennis has gotten a little stale, or maybe your results aren't what you want them to be, or you just have lost a feel for the ball, sometimes demoing a few rackets can really kind of reinvigorate you a little bit and kind of rediscover like, hey, I can hit the ball pretty well. Like maybe there's something that I could try that'll, do some stuff for my game. And maybe sometimes you end up coming back to your racket that you love, but there's certainly nothing wrong with testing the waters, and maybe you find something that you're more comfortable with and it gives you more confidence. And what could you possibly want than more confidence on the court? Like if it makes you want to call up your hitting partner and say, hey, you want to hit today? That's really what we're all after, right? Is just that exuberance and excitement to get back on the court and kind of get moving again. And I know tennis, I think all tennis players to a point kind of have a love-hate relationship with the sport where, oh man, I'm really playing well. I want to play all the time. And then, you start to take a few L's and you're like, oh, my shoulder's a little sore. Or, maybe I'm speaking from personal experience.
No, I think
Um,
we all have that.
but it's nice to just be able to inject a little bit of enthusiasm and excitement, and hopefully, with your racket choice, you're like enthused to get them ordered and get them strung up, and
Yes.
fill up that court sheet with, hey, we're gonna try to do Tuesdays and Thursdays, or
Yeah.
that sort of thing. I'll give you a perfect example, Pete. We played last night in Texas, and I know you'll laugh at me, but it was getting chilly in Texas. The wind was blowing about 20 miles an hour, and so we're down, probably 50 degrees, and we're all sort of like, like, would we play, like this on most days? And we're sort of like, well, no, but weather's going to start to get a little dodgy, and so we all just kind of said, you know what, it's Thursday night, Thanksgiving next week, let's go play tennis.
Hmm.
And so we did, and we had a great time. But I think it's just kind of that thing is like when you're excited and enthusiastic, you're going to want to try to make that court time happen. And I think even most tennis players would tell you the decision to play that day is almost always better than the decision not to play.
Hmm.
Um, but
Almost
yeah,
always. Almost
almost
always.
always. Got to have
But
that caveat.
I will say this, a couple of things. Number one, I was excited to do the demo program. I mean, I'm kind of a little sad that it's coming to an end. I like that I could just pick a different racket out, and another thing that was interesting is uh, the place where I teach. I'll give them a little shout out, Windy Hill Athletic Club. They're high performance juniors. The juniors every day were like, "What rackets you have today?" Like everybody got excited about it. I mean, everybody kind of likes the idea of new, and especially new racket. And
Right.
I'm like, well, I'm hitting with this. They're like, oh, they grab it out of my hand. Let me try that. So, if anybody is feeling a little stale out there or feel like your racket's outdated and you're wondering like, well, does a racket really make a difference? You should totally go on a demo program because it is fun. I mean, it's fun. And I almost didn't want it to end. I'm like, but once I hit with this, I did kind of feel, which is kind of a great feel. I'm like, am I going to feel more comfortable with any other racket? Like I feel like it's checking all the boxes for me. And one of the boxes is, I think, a big separator was, again, talking about our juniors. Often some kid might, have to step out for a couple of minutes. Maybe they hurt something a little bit, or maybe an odd number of people show up, or someone's late. I often have to step in and hit with these juniors who are pretty good. Like
Right.
they're very good. And I'm like cold, I'm stiff. I didn't warm up like them because I'm just planning on teaching. And this racket and the head gravity were the only two that I felt like I don't need like a warm up to start feeling the ball. I feel like as soon as I step in, I feel the ball and I can hit with them. Where other rackets, I'm like, I'm not really feeling the ball yet. And sometimes you go in there and you hit for 2 minutes, and then the guy running the program will say, okay, now play points to 5. And I'm like, I can barely feel the ball. I don't want to play
You're
points
like,
to
let me
5.
let me stretch.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
getting loosened up.
but these two rackets, I did feel kind of comfortable when I was put in those situations, which was another
Right.
decision maker for me.
You hit on such a key term, with tennis players, and it's really a very individual thing, but it's just feel.
Hmm.
Feel for the ball. Well, this feels stiff to me. Well, it's not stiff. Well, it feels stiff to me. It's
Right.
it's all very subjective. It's not like math. Like you can go, well, 2 + 2 is 4. And I can be like, well, the Prestige is a really difficult racket to play with, and some 3-5 picks up the Prestige and they go, I love this thing. Like it's a very, you know, it I just went through the house buying process, and it sounds silly, you know, a house obviously way more expensive than a racket, you know, and takes a long time, and but the process is similar. You know, you get to the point where you've seen so many houses, and you're just like, I feel like I've seen this house, or you know, I feel
Mhm.
like I've seen, but ultimately you find one, and you're just sort of like, man, it kind of has this, it has this what I was looking for, you know, it's got this space here. And I feel very much the same with, you know, a racket purchase. Like, well, you know, I was looking for a little more feel and it's got more feel, and I need it to be forgiving but not too flimsy, and it kind of has that. And I'm teaching, so I need it to be manageable weight, and I need to be able to step in and at least be competitive with juniors and drills. And I think kind of like you said it, like before you know it, you kind of go, I think I found it. You know, like
Mhm.
it's kind of it's not always, you know, the sword in the stone moment, you know, where you're like, this is the one, you know, but sometimes it's a lot more just, you know, hey, the process has sort of played itself out, and here's where I'm at. And this racket I'm holding just, it seems to really fit the mold for what I was looking for.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. So I guess the next step is to order the rackets and have them come in, and I'll shoot a video on that once they get to my place, and
So Pete, let me ask
yeah,
you just a couple of quick questions
sure.
about that part of the process. Like, you know, there are some folks that when they switch to a racket, you know, they'll buy, okay, you know, I like the new Dunlop CX400. You know, I'll order one, you know, string it up and kind of start playing it. And then maybe, you know, 5, 6 weeks later, maybe a month later, you know, maybe there's a sale or something, like, okay, I'll order another one. And then there's some folks that are like, okay, you know I did the demo program. Like, I'm not going to be dating any other rackets. I'm
Mm,
exclusive now.
mhm.
So I know I want to lock in. I'm going to get two. You know, I'm going to get them, you know, strung the same grip size and everything. Like, where do you fall in that? Like, are you kind of a details guy? Like, you want to fill out the bag and have your 2 or 3 frames strung the same way, or are you sort of like, hey man, give me one racket, I can get it restrung, you know, when I need to. If I'm really start to play a lot more and I'm busting some strings, maybe I'll go ahead and acquire another one. How do you kind of proceed from here, I
Yeah,
guess
no,
is what
I
I'm
I I
asking.
think I think, I think if you're anybody who, like, let me say this, if you're a 3.0 player and you've never broken a string in your life, you maybe can start with one racket, you know, you don't have
Right.
to buy 2 or 3. But I think once you start to figure out how to hit top spin, um, and accelerate on the ball, you know you're gonna be breaking a string, I don't know, 7 to 14 days every, you know, so and so I want 2, maybe 3, right off the bat, and
Right.
I want them, I like the way this racket was strung. I want them all strung the same, so if I break a string in the middle of a hitting session, or if I do decide to play a match every now and then, that I can just pick the racket up and it's like, you know, same thing.
I really agree with you that, you know, the one scenario that I thought was interesting, and one of my students several years ago pointed it out to me, and he's like, you know, I know everybody, you know, get extra rackets for when you break a string. And he said, well, I basically have a racket that I can leave in my locker at high school. And so, you know, he's got his racket for school practice, you know, that way he didn't always have to bring, you know, one back and forth. And then he's got, you know, his racket for club practice or for, you know, his lessons and stuff. And I never thought about that, but I'm like, man, that's pretty smart. You know, that way you've got the same racket and you don't have to just be toting, you know, back and forth. But yeah, that's a really good point, I think, about when you're really starting to develop spin, and your play schedule starts to get more regular. I think it certainly makes sense to you know, to fill out the bag with a couple of rackets.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about one more kind of quick thing? What about grip size? So what grip size did you demo? And did you think about going smaller grip size? Did you think about going bigger grip size? Like, um, what are
Well,
your thoughts there?
Um, I've it seems like so many people, and I think maybe because this is what we kind of got used to as kids. I like 4 and 3/8. And these are all pretty much. I'm pretty sure they feel like 4 3/8
Okay.
to me. Yeah. So, yeah,
So there
talk
certainly was
about
a
that though. What are the advantages of us? Like, I have this one guy who says he has Nadal's grip size because he's like idolized Nadal, and he gave it to me. I'm like, is it really? Is his grip really that small? I mean, it felt like a 4-year-old. It'd
yeah.
be almost two.
So
Like,
so Nadal does something very very specialized. Obviously, he's a savant, right?
yeah.
Like it's you know we should try to guide our customers not based on the exceptions, right?
Yes.
Nadal is by definition an exception. But if you notice, I mean, he really holds the racket. I mean, a part of his hand is almost off the bottom of the butt cap on his racket.
Mm,
And I think anybody would say no one's ever hit a forehand the way that Rafa has done it. Now you see a lot of copy, people are kind of emulating it. But my perception has always been this. To your point, 16, 17-year-old, I was using a 4.5.
mm,
In college, I used a 4.5 grip. Ever since college, I feel like the game has changed a little bit. I feel like my stroke style has become, a lot more vertical. And so I kind of feel like 4.5 almost feels a little clunky. Like
mhm.
it's almost, my perception, again, I don't have physics to back it up, but my perception is if you want like a rock solid racket and handle for a flat hitter, maybe your more Eastern grip or even continental, like the stability increases with a wider handle. I do believe that. I think there's a little less twisting. Again, it might be very negligible, but that is my perception. I do feel like with a 4.5 or a 4 5/8 grip, if you're really trying to generate tons and tons of spin, it kind of just, particularly on the forehand, it kind of just feels like it fights you a little bit. Um, Now, I don't think it's like, oh, okay, I get 30% more spin if I have a 3/8 instead of a half. But
Mm,
I think that's the general trend is people feel they can be a little more whippy with a smaller grip and earn a little bit more stability, maybe less twisting with a bigger grip. I'll tell you where I'm at, and I'm just kind of at 4 3/8 because I feel like
yeah.
4 3/8. I put an overgrip on it, and it's pretty consistent. At times I tinker and I go bigger. The thing I see among a lot of club players that I want them to watch out for is when you get a grip that's too small, a lot of times you end up strangling the racket,
Mhm,
too tight, and that can
mhm,
fatigue your arm,
mhm,
before it really should be fatigued.
mhm.
And so I would kind of say, a racket that you can hold comfortably and feel like you're not having to death grip it to keep it from twisting in your hands is probably about the right size.
Yeah,
Um, so I think you're probably dead on 4 3/8. I know some guys that are very, very good players that have gone super small, but
yeah.
I just don't, again, we get back to that feel, right? And what is comfortable to you. Um, I was just curious, again, my grip size kind of went from 4.5 in college when basically everything was a little bit flatter through the court.
Mhm.
And now obviously with the advent of some of the polyester strings, we're playing a little more vertical and a little more spin. I still don't hit tons of spin, but I do think my stroke style has changed a little bit. And
Mhm.
I think 4 3/8 probably is just the more adaptable.
Yeah, it's 4 3/8. I mean, it seems like that's the most popular size of a grip, right?
I think it might have trended down a little bit, but
Even
you know, the
lower,
the, the benefit, 4.25
four and
probably
a
was
quarter.
the um, you know, was where it was trending. But the thing about 4.25 is it gives people a chance. Like, okay, if the grip's too small, you can always build it up, and that's the thing. And if you get a 4 3/8 and it's too big at 4 3/8, like it used to be, you were kind of sunk. But now, like the manufacturers all make like a thinner replacement grip,
Mhm.
so you can almost have a 4 3/8 and wrap it with a grip that doesn't reduce the grip size, but it's
I see.
just a lot thinner.
Mhm.
Um, and they kind of have found a way to do that without making it just super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think 4 3/8, especially at clubs out there like Tennis Express, it's awesome because we can let you demo, a racket in a 4 1/4, or you can demo one in 4 3/8. You can tinker with that a little bit, but a lot of times, at a local club, you get a demo racket and it might be one grip size,
Hmm.
4 3/8. And so I think 4 3/8 is still the standard. I think you'll see with a lot of the lighter weight rackets, under 300 grams, a lot of those demos are going to be available in 4 1/4,
Hmm.
just because it's going to be a little bit more accessible to beginners, or, ladies 3-0, 3-5 players that just have a smaller grip. Rackets, it makes it a lot easier for them to demo than, I mean, you don't want somebody having to demo a 4 1/2. That's the thing that you don't really see much, is demos on the really
Yeah.
bigger grip
Yeah. I
sizes.
feel like yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, cool, man. Well, do you have anything else for me, or what do you think? The next thing
Um,
is to order, right?
yeah, I mean, I just want to say I appreciate you kind of thinking of Tennis Express, and I loved doing the Tennis Con stuff for you. So congrats on Tennis Con. I thought it was another big hit, and I love seeing and hearing people that are excited about tennis and trying to improve their games. And with any luck, your new racket purchase, you'll have an injection of confidence into your own game, and maybe it'll want you to, call a hitting partner and say, "Hey, let's get out there one more time this week. I want to,
Absolutely.
put it through the paces," because that's ultimately what we're all about, is getting people back out to the courts and hopefully playing on a more regular basis.
Well, I'm excited that I'm getting these around the holiday season, because I think, if tennis is like one of your big loves in your life, I mean, when you get a racket, even if it's not the holiday season, it feels like your birthday, or it feels like, one of the holidays.
Are
Um,
you going to wrap your rackets up and put
I
them
well,
under the tree? What do you think?
I would, if somebody would do it for me, I would. But one of my biggest things I hate in life is to wrap anything, and so I won't do it. But I wish somebody would do it for me. But I don't think anybody's going to do it for me, But
Okay.
I would
Okay.
like to do that. But
Right.
knowing me, I'm too lazy.
Right. Maybe just put a tag on it that says to Pete, from
Yeah,
Pete.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
All right,
Very
man. Well,
cool.
thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you more in 2022.
That's right. Hey, Pete, have a great holiday, and excited you found your racket at Tennis Express.
All right, you take care, Sam.
You too.